Well, a bit of experimenting. I tried various things. That lever was still slightly bent, and once I'd bent it back better, it seems to work fine. So that's all to the good. I think effectively when I was attempting to straighten it up, I bent it too far the wrong way, the other way. Alright, so that's in place. I'll hook the spring into position now, which means lifting the tip of the spring up with one pair of tweezers, tucking it down behind there. So that lever is now sprung loaded and moves freely, which is what we want. So the sprocket shaft, that's the next thing to worry about. So our film sprocket goes in the back of the camera, slot side up. And the sprocket shaft, I want to lubricate that with a bit of synthetic grease towards the top, towards the bottom, because that's where it runs through the body casting, and normally I just give a wipe to the tip of the teeth as well on that pinion, and that'll drop in from the top, pass through our sprocket, we've got to line it up with the hole in the body at the bottom. It's just about there. Pull that past there. Now I might need to take this off to get that in place. Let's do that. Not quite enough play here to get that past that pinion. Now we're in business. Put those screws back in place. Okay, at the base here, I'm supporting that shaft with my finger from underneath. Pull back this tab, and that should allow that to pop up past the lever, and it's not. Why not? Don't know why that's not engaging nicely for me. Oh, there we go. No problem, just can't have been holding my mouth right. And those two are engaged, are they? Let's rotate this to bring the hole in the shaft up to the top where I can get the screw through it. Oh, that's a bit fast moving. Here it is. Now there are three little small screws that look much the same. The two that are slightly shorter and are identical are the hinge pin screws. The slightly longer one is the one that does this job. Sometimes this will lead in easier from one side of the shaft than the other. And let's try that. That's it. And at the base we can fit the rewind button. So here's our rewind button, its washer and its spring. So what I normally do is put some synthetic grease through the spring, put that on the button, put the washer on the button, supporting that shaft with my finger from below, screw that into the end of the sprocket shaft, and check that it actually works, that it depresses and will click back up again. That's good. Taking my pliers, I can tighten the thing up. And that's in place. As the film advance rotates, the tips here hit that lever and swing it across and release the rewind button. Okay, so the base of the camera here now, we're fairly well advanced. This shield goes round our rewind button. On the earliest cameras there were no raised lips on that shield, which meant that it was very easy to depress the rewind button accidentally. And Kodak were quick to make a change to make that harder to achieve. Okay, well I'll tighten those two screws up. And our tripod socket can go on the base of the camera. That's held in place with 3 screws. And inevitably they'll be the ones that have got the glue in them, or remnants of the glue, or obvious signs of corrosion from the base of the camera. Because, as is usually the case, the ugly screws, you hide them under the leatherettes in places where they'll never be seen again. And the pretty screws are left out on display, even if they're only on display to the next repair person. Okay, so that's fine. I'm just going to temporarily put the tripod socket surround on there so this leather's not flapping. Because we're not done with this yet, but I don't want that leather flapping around and potentially being vulnerable to damage. If I find the right screws for that, we'll be in business. I only need to put one in there, just enough to hold this thing in place. That's it. Alright, that just stabilises things, so now I can continue working on the rest of the camera. I'm having trouble with this video camera today, it only focuses half the time. Must be getting tired and old like its owner. Okay, so the focus is good, our film advance mechanism, the basics of it are in the body. All the clever work now goes on at the top. Well, since it's sitting here right in front of me, I'm going to assemble the film rewind shaft next. So apply some synthetic grease to the inner, slide that into the outer. It's got a little detent spring on it which stops it from sliding around too freely. It feels a little bit tight. Just check that that spring's lubricated. That should pass right up. It's got a little tab on the end of it which keys into the outer shaft, so it looks like that when it's in place. The bush I'm lubricating with some synthetic grease. And you can tell which way around this bush goes because obviously the countersinks are at the top. Put that in the camera body and fit the 3 screws. These are the last of the 3 screws of this type, and they should be the prettiest because these are the ones that are on display. Everything else, all the other, the 3 here and the 3 on the tripod socket, are all effectively hidden so you can't see them. So if you had an ugly screw, because you had to fight with it a lot to get it off, or somebody else had done the same, then hide that away somewhere else. Have your pretty screws out where they can be seen. Not everyone's going to dig in as deep as we have today. Okay, that part looks good. Just tidying the desk here, I've got jars of screws and things out, all scattered about. This film advance, that's next. I can start assembling the components to the top of the film advance now. I'll start with this gear. Just put a bit of synthetic grease on there. It won't hurt to put a little bit on the outside edge of that. That'll dries both of those pinions. That's nice and smooth. Yeah. There's a little ratchet that goes on here. Just been having a bit of strife with my video camera not focusing correctly. I hope that previous videos will come out okay. I won't know until I edit them. Let's get this in place and hook its spring into position. And you can see that ratchet pull clicking as it runs round, stops that thing from being able to back up. Right, let's carry on. Oh, we're still in the picture, just. Okay. That little drive dog can go on there. And its return spring. This piece here, this cam, I know from experience that if I start with that small rectangular notch pointing off in this direction, that's going to give me approximately, a good tension to the return spring for the film advance lever. Is that connected up correctly? No, it hasn't picked up. That tab that I had positioned at the front there should have picked up on that and dropped into the slot. Now it has. Okay, so that's all good. This gear goes on top of that shaft. And that'll go on top of the gear. Yeah. There are two small springs that look much like this. This one is slightly larger diameter and slightly shorter. Drops down that hole in the casting right there. I'll give that a light white with molybdenum paste on the inside of that hole. And that little piece there drops in there. This is the bracket that holds everything down. Just going to squeeze a bit of grease into that. That's a riveted construction, so you can't get it apart to do anything more drastic than that. This sits on here, so this tab on the bracket here holds down that arm. Alright, so there are 3 screws that hold this in position, and some of them are awkward to get into place. This is probably the easiest. At the back here, getting that screw down in that spot is a bit of a trial. If you had some curved tipped tweezers of just the right proportions, you might be able to achieve it. Suffice it to say, it's a problem. But once you can get the screw stood up in there, you can engage a screwdriver and run that down. I'm not tightening that yet, I've got one more screw to go in place. Now this screw is a shoulder screw. It has to pass through this weird shaped spring. Make sure that the spring is round the shoulder of the screw, it's not trapped underneath it or anything. I'll tighten those 3 screws up now. Now if we depress this lever, you can lift that spring up and over the back of it, like that. So now this is sprung loaded. Okay, so far so good. Oh, I can see that I've got to change the battery. Back shortly. Okay, let's see if I can get this tensioned up. Where's our start position? Be there if we had 1 full turn. If we started our film advance lever at that position, let's just give that a part of a turn. Get that on the top, checking that that would work. That feels good. Okay, I'm going to put the shutter cocking rack in place next. So I'll lubricate that with a bit of synthetic grease. Slide that in from the end. Now as this comes right round past the end of its normal stop, I can feed that rack in, it'll pick the gear up. I'm checking to see how much space I've got here at the end. I can tell from experience I can go another notch deeper. That's it. So that cocking rack's now trapped in place. If I don't advance this too far, it can't fall out. Okay, so the film advance basically is complete at the top. It needs its frame counter stuff on there, of course, which we can put on because we might as well check how that's going to work. I'll assemble that. Alright, so I'll gather together my pieces. What else do we need? We need one of those, and we will need that washer and that screw and a wavy washer. And I'm pretty sure they're identical, so we don't need to worry about which one we pick up. That'll do. So to the assembly. You can see I've got this advanced a quarter of a turn. That puts things in a nice good resting position. Where is my spring? Here it is. Just take the frame counter spring and put a little bit of synthetic grease on the base of that. That sits down in there like that. Now the other bits. Alright, there's a couple of ways about going about this job, but this works well for me. So I'll start with this piece. Put a little wipe of grease on the top surface of that. And that's just assembly grease, if you like. All it does is help hold things together. There you go, those two pieces now fitted together. Now this piece has a scratch mark across it. It's an ugly looking scratch mark. It was obviously done by hand. It was done with a purpose. That's to tell you which way round this disc goes. And that scratch line points towards the number 1. If you get this on back to front, you'll have a film advance which locks when you reach frame number 21 or 22, which is tedious to say the least. So I'll put a little bit of grease on the back of their number dial there and slid that in position, so that's stuck nicely together. Got our wavy washer, put a little bit of grease on that, both sides. Take the top, put that over the number dial and its bits and pieces. Flip that over. Oh, that's come out. That's flaming wood. Let's put that back in place. So that's not sitting as firmly as I'd normally expect it to. Let's put the spring in the back. Yeah, bring this back in place. That thin washer there, which is only present on some cameras, it was not a part as designed, if you like, it's a fix. that goes on there. We put our lever back on there, taking this assembly that we've now got together. I'm holding that down with my finger, rotate it clockwise until I hear the ratchets engage. Can't tell whether I've got one or both ratchets engaging there. It may be that the first one fell in place without a struggle. And I've got a special tool for tightening this up, which I'll find in a second. And I'll just run that loosely down with a pair of tweezers, trying not to make more of a mess of that screw than has already been done by somebody else. I think that's okay. Yep, frame counter works. I bet I've got that round the wrong way. When it fell apart on me, I'm sure I put that disc in the wrong place. This will probably lock at frame number 21 for us, or 22. Let's find out. Oh, we can't really tell unless it was on the top of the camera. The top was in place because that's where it locks to the top cover, not to anything else. That's alright. The main thing is we know that the film advance moves smoothly, that the frame counter advances one frame each time and no more, and that generally speaking that's all as it should be. I think we should put the shutter release in place. Here's our shutter release. Now with the shutter release we've got this little shim piece that goes on the bottom. And that's important that that goes in place. So we'll get these pieces all sorted out. Here's the return spring. Yeah. This little collar, this is a limiting collar. Basically it limits the stroke of the film advance lever. It goes over the centre shaft, the main shaft. Doesn't go over the side. Doesn't wrap around the spring. Doesn't do anything else in a very imaginative way like I've seen them come to me before. Just goes like that. I'm going to take the body, give this a wipe with molybdenum paste down those two holes. You could just as easily use any other grease you like to do that job. The spring goes over the short piece, the short post, and we've got to get that washer in place. Now what I normally do, because normally you're dealing with this when you've got the front door on the camera so you can't see what you're doing, normally is I put a wipe of molybdenum paste or a wipe of grease on the end of the shutter release shaft like that. Use that to glue our shim washer in position. And then feed this in here, and we've got to get it connected up over the shaft there. And if you do it very carefully, you can do it without dislodging it. That washer is pretty much exactly the same size as the hole in the top plate. So it's easy to dislodge it, but there I've got it in place. And basically it's just to provide a bit more length on here so that this presses this down far enough. Not all cameras will have it because, like a lot of things in life, it was a fix-up. Like the shim on the top of the film advance, it was there to make up for something that wasn't quite right. In an ideal world, of course, you wouldn't have extra shims like that because you'd have made the parts so they worked first time all the time. But that's working fine. That's exactly where we want it to be. And the film advance works nicely. The shutter releases the film advance smoothly. That's all looking good. One more task I'll do while I'm here is I'll take some synthetic grease, and on the lobes of this cam here I'll just put a touch of synthetic grease. You don't need to do all of them because it'll distribute itself fairly promptly. That just makes sure that ratchet action is nice and smooth. We really can't go much further with this. We can put the door on the front of the camera, I suppose. But we're just about done with the camera body for the moment until I've done the rangefinder. So with the door, what are we going to do here? Well, normally I take some synthetic grease, put a wipe around those pins top and bottom, which lubricates those pins, and also it's very handy for gluing these cartridge paper washers in place so they don't fall off while you're trying to do things, because you can rest assured they will fall off otherwise. Okay, so there's our door, cartridge washers in place, cartridge paper washers in place. What I'll do now, you'll hook this into that slot. Shutter release is falling apart, excuse me. Got to get this on before that shim decides that there's nobody holding it and makes a run for it. That's better. Okay, so stay where you put. That pin has to go into that slot. The other pin has to go into this slot at the top. So we get the bottom one hooked in like that. Stretch this out. Yeah, that shim, that cartridge paper washer is already moving. Do that again. And if I stretch it out nicely, we've got it in place. Our shutter release is making a bolt for the exit again. Is my washer still present? I can't see where that's going. Yeah, it's still there. That's lucky. Okay. The hinge pins. Let's just get that shutter release button around there, out the way. Oh. The hinge pins, so we've got two hinge pin screws, and we have got two shim washers that go between the body and the door. So I'll find the screws. I was looking at the natural position of that door. We'll put the small washer at the top, I think, the thinner washer at the top, the thicker washer at the base, and see how that behaves for us. Yep, that one's in place and done. Now I've got to do the one at the bottom. I got to keep my finger on the shutter release button here, otherwise that's going to fall off. And of course, helpfully, I put this bracket and this screw in place so we can't even get the leather back out of the way to get our other hinge pin screw in place easily. Just unhook that. Still in shot, only just. Right. So our washer goes into this space.